All right. So where do we see evidence of the hippie revival? Oh gosh, right? All right, so there's a lot. I would argue actually that there's a lot happening right now that would be indicative that we're in the beginning. Maybe I don't think we can speak of it in that kind of linear terms. The beginning of or middle of. We're just amidst a hippie revival. And where do we see it? Well, I told you how the hippie is really about an inner transformation, a spiritual experience. At its core, it's a spiritual movement. And by the way, if you guys are curious, in the 60s and 70s, there were all kinds of hippies. There were hippies who were rooted in Buddhism. There were hippies that were rooted in, were you guys aware that there was a whole movement called the Jesus hippies? Or the Jesus freaks? Right? They called themselves the Jesus freaks. Is there anybody here who comes from like kind of a Christian or a Christ-based background? Okay, sure. So you might find this interesting. There was a group of Jesus hippies who literally found their relationship with Christ through disavowing from the church, turning within themselves, and establishing a closer relationship with Christ. And they were called the Jesus freaks or the Jesus hippies. Yeah.
Wasn't there a movie out about that recently?
That's exactly what I was
Yeah,
talking
it's called the Jesus Revolution, right? And I highly recommend it. It's one of the most incredible movies I've seen in recent times. Right? Really, really powerful, right? So I want to make the point. There's a renewed emphasis in this country we're seeing on really expanding ourselves into delving into the depths of different spiritual traditions. Hinduism, Buddhism, indigenous traditions, Sufism, which is like the mystical elements of Islam, and Christian mysticism, right, are all paths, right, that we're seeing an increased interest in. Now, what I'm trying to get at is what we're seeing in America happening right now. It's kind of what happened in the 60s and 70s. People are becoming less interested in organized religion, but they're delving even deeper into the mystical sects of those religions. They're disavowing traditional organized religious structures and trying to delve into the living spirit of those same religions. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does that make sense what I'm going with that? Right? In other words, they're what? Trying to, like a Christian hippie is trying to develop a direct relationship with Christ and live the values of Christ without what? Sort of like the dictates of an organized church or system of thought above them, right? Dictating. Somebody who's interested in Buddhism might not be wanting a formal structure, but trying to understand the Buddhist teachings within themselves, right? It's a search for spirituality without the confines of organized religion. Does that kind of make sense, right? That's what we're starting to see right now. So there's an interesting poll taken by Pew Research. You take polls with a grain of salt, right? The wording of the questions can be skewed, and they can be manipulated, but there's some truth to that. Right? There's some truth. Interesting enough, in a recent poll from September last month, 33% of adults now identify as spiritual, quote, not religious. That's the highest reported percentage since the late 70s. By the way, if you're curious, 33% identified as spiritual, which was the highest record since the 1970s. 20% identify as atheist or agnostic, and 47% describe themselves as traditionally religious. What we're seeing is what? The atheism and agnostic has stayed pretty much the same, consistent. Religion has fallen from about 60% to 47% in the last few decades. And then we're seeing a rise in people who are seeking direct spiritual experiences. People are hungry, right? Particularly younger people are hungry for a deeper, more authentic experience, right? Maybe that's being driven by what? Our over-reliance on technology. Maybe that's being driven by the mental health crisis that's the result of being alienated from our true selves, right? Maybe that's being driven by societal structures that we're seeing aren't really serving our highest purpose anymore. People are searching for something deeper in meaning. Fundamentally, that's what the 60s and 70s was about. People searching for something deeper and more authentic, that pulled us away from such a mechanical way of life, right? We're seeing that happen. Meditation. How many people, I was curious, how many people have ever sat down and meditated before? Awesome. Well, that's awesome. Wait, one more time with the hands. And that's like actually really exciting. And that gives me half the room. Man, you know what? It might be everybody after we're done today, right? If you choose, right? So meditation. So the meditation revolution, which by the way, I'm drawing a direct quote from a Time magazine article that came out some years back. And it was a huge front page spread on Time magazine, which is like a very establishment, magazine, very in the box, be the mechanical man, or woman, right? Or, everything, And so they had a picture of somebody meditating. I remember seeing that in Time magazine every year. I'm kidding. I remember when that came out. I saved it. I'm like, they have a whole article, Time magazine, about meditation. That's wild. And and what we're finding is that more and more Americans are becoming introduced to meditation practice and realizing how much inner peace it can bring us, how we can tune us more to our authentic self, how we can calm our minds. It can kind of relieve our anxiety. It can increase our feeling of connection to ourselves and all others. I mean, I would argue it's one of the most important practices you can possibly take up in your life. And it naturally will bring you deeper into your true, authentic, or spiritual self, right? And so it's pretty hopeful, right? And that poll revealed that 17% of Americans have practiced meditation at least once in the last year. I was blown away by the statistic, up from 14% in 2017 and 4% in 2012. How about that? So 4 times as many people, I'll put it another way, in the last decade, 4 times as many people are meditating in our country than they were a decade ago. That's significant, right? That's really significant. That's, as more individuals start to kind of like awaken and seek their authentic self, eventually enough people start doing that where it starts to become what does it do? It runs spreads, right? That's how it happens. So, how many people have ever practiced yoga? Show of hands. Okay. So that was unheard of, right? Not too long ago, right? So yoga, right? Yoga means literally, it means to yoke, or it means to it's union. Essentially, yoga means union. What that's union with what? Well, union with self, right? Which has also been interpreted as God, as creator, or as creation, or as connecting with the one that's within you, right? That's what yoga has traditionally means. It comes from India, right? It comes from the Hindu faith, right? Yoga.
Is it connecting mind, body, spirit, and soul?
It's a connecting of mind, body, spirit, soul, right? All together. It's the conjoining of that, right? So it brings you naturally into that authentic self we're talking about. Well, look at this. 36 million Americans practice yoga according to Yoga Earth magazine. The number of yoga practitioners has increased by over 50% in just 5 years. Right now, some of you might be thinking, maybe it's just like a fad. This is what's happening. People are jumping yoga, but who cares? Fad or not, more people are being turned on to a practice that has been proven scientifically to calm your mind, to increase your overall feeling and sense of connection, and happiness and fulfillment and relaxation, which can only be good for the world. More people are finding peace. That's good for everyone, right? What do y'all feel? All those hands up again who did yoga, right? What draws you to it? Why do you like it? I'm just curious. What do you like about it? Yeah.
When I first tried meditating, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing, and so it made it easier to meditate because you were doing stuff.
Okay, so it made it easier to meditate because you were doing you were doing things the whole time. So like movement, it's meditation, but just with movement. How do you feel when you do yoga?
Good. It helps a lot with sports too.
Helps a lot with sports too. Does it help your focus, concentration?
Yeah.
You always feel more relaxed? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you feel really calm, okay? Awesome. You feel a lot calmer. Right? Anybody else? Yeah.
You kind of emphasize deep breathing a lot more. So I feel like you're more connected to yourself.
Ah. The breath is like your pathway into your true self, right? It's like it's presence, right? Really what it does, right, yoga and meditation, is it makes you present. When you can suddenly be present, and you're not, how many people here find a lot of anxiety because they're thinking about the past or the future? Right? How many people have felt that? My hand is up, right? You know, when you're fully in the present moment, that's where the magic happens in life. That's the essence of life. That's where it is. We're also seeing a lot of people are seeking what we're finding is more connection through nature too. There's entire brands of therapy that is starting to take off now in our country called wilderness therapy. Has anyone heard about that before? People are literally seeking immersive experiences in nature. People are paying huge sums of money to send their kids on huge trips into the nature with trained counselors and guides in order to try to find inner peace. Veterans are seeking to go heal from the tragedy of war, the ravages of war, in order to find their inner peace and heal. And it's having tremendous impact, right? Wilderness therapy, I believe about a decade ago, only 3 schools in the entire country offered wilderness therapy as even a major or a area of study. Now there's over 100 schools offering wilderness therapy.
And there's forest bathing. They'll take your blood and look at all your hormones and your cortisol levels, and then they'll have you walk through the forest, and then they'll take your blood again. And your cortisol levels, which is like your stress, shows how much stress is in the body, will come way down. And you can look it up. It's really neat.
Yeah, it's really cool. Right? Forest, they call it forest bathing. It comes out of Japan, right?
I think it started there.
It started in Japan. Yeah. So we're finding that like people are seeking direct immersive experiences with nature. How many people here like to get out into nature? Oh man, this is such a good room. This is an awesome room you're on, right? Same thing I asked you in meditation and yoga. What do you feel when you're out in nature? What is the draw of nature? What does it do to you when you're out there? Yeah.
One thing I like a lot about going outside is being able to see all the different forms of life, and you just sit there and watch it for a while and study it, kind of appreciate that they're not necessarily simpler or dumb or worse or something. They're living their own intricate, complex lives in their own little system. And you're kind of part of it.
Whoa, so it makes you more aware of your interconnection. And it fills you with gratitude for what you're a part of, right? Actually, you know what it does? You know, in nature, for me at least, it always brings out, I'm always really aware of the miracle of life. I'm like, wow, this is so far out. Wow, how did that, how is there a double rainbow in the sky? And how did this waterfall get formed? And how did, it brings the mystery of life. How about that? It brings you more in tune with the mystery of life, right? The true mystery of life, which I think we're all innately trying to connect to. Yeah.
It also makes you feel small, not in a bad way, but realize that the world feels bigger. You're not just trapped within walls, and so your problems aren't as big as you thought they were.
Got it. So what do we call that? It makes you feel small. It humbles you. Right? Humbles you. We all need a little bit of humbling. Right? All of us. Yeah.
Specifically when the hike doesn't have service, I feel very much like
There's no phone. There's no boxes. You're expansive. Yeah, I know. I heard there's a famous quote from Thoreau. Well, I would argue Thoreau had a lot of the hippie spirit, right? You guys all know Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau. David Thoreau used to have a famous quote. He had a famous quote in this essay he wrote called Walking, which I think captures as well. He walked deep into the forest, 3 or 4 miles, and he's like, when I look back and I can see a light coming from society, I would just keep going further into the forest, right? And he kept walking, and just didn't come back. And the idea is that he felt free, his soul was liberated, he felt detached from all the distractions trying to pull us from being here, right, in the moment. It's really important. Okay, so people are what? Seeking direct spiritual experiences through meditation, through yoga, through connecting with nature, which is all the things the hippies did, right? And advocated for in the 60s and 70s. And what would be a presentation on the hippie revival without talking about psychedelics, right? One of the things that defined the hippie era in the 60s and 70s was the experimentation with psychedelics. Now,
It's still going on right now.
it's still going on right now. Now, Nick, I'm just curious, when you think of psychedelics, what comes to your mind when you think of that?
I think they're great if used correctly and practically, but they can be opening the doors to hell.
Yeah, so they're not meant to be used recreationally, right? I want to throw that out there, right? Psychedelics have a much higher purpose, which is actually, they can be, remember those 2 guys I talked about up on the top, the quotes, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass? Psychedelics led them both on their spiritual journeys. It opens the doors of expanding your awareness and your consciousness. And I'm not advocating for them, I'm aware I'm in a college campus. I'm not advocating for them, nor am I advocating against them. But psychedelics are a doorway, one of many doorways, just like what meditation, yoga, and connecting with nature, which I would argue are the 3. Those are the pillars, right? The psychedelics can be useful for helping you connect and expand your consciousness to push you out of your mechanical way of living. Again, they're not meant for recreation. They have a sacred purpose, which means they're not supposed to be done over and over and over again. They're supposed to be something that choose you within yourself. And actually, they're so sacred, and they're so have had such incredible transformative powers that there's literally a huge plethora of literature coming out now showing how much they can actually, we're talking about psilocybin mushrooms, LSD in controlled doses, DMT, right, ayahuasca, right? And they're showing that science is now catching up with spirituality and showing that these substances have incredible healing opportunities to them.
On addiction, anxiety, depression.
PTSD, right? In Oregon, this is going to blow your mind. Oregon, you can literally study to become a psychedelic guide and lead people through really controlled doses. What they do is they'll lead you through, they'll control your dose for first-time users. You're in a very controlled setting with very calming music, calming thoughts from a licensed counselor. You can be a licensed counselor. You're in an extremely controlled setting. Usually they'll even put a blindfold on you to block out any kind of like potentially disrupting experiences. And the whole idea is because the setting matters. You're not really, going into a rock show. Not like the most recommended thing, right? So this is a very controlled, highly spiritual, calming setting where you have a guide who has done this numerous times, and the intention, most importantly, it's always about intention, is to turn you inwards, right? And a lot of you have to face down your traumas, and if it starts to get overwhelming, there's a guide right there holding your hand and counseling you, literally talking you through what you're feeling right now, what's happening right now. People will be crying during the experience, but they feel cared for because they have a loving and trusting counselor who's there with them, walking them through it. It's also shown psychedelics in those kinds of settings have also been shown to help people who have terminal illnesses, who are facing the prospects of dying. And obviously, for many people, death can be a very terrifying experience if you haven't cultivated maybe that deeper a deeper connection to the entire process, right? So and so literally y'all, NYU, these are big time colleges, universities, Harvard University, who ironically Harvard kicked out Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, the people at the top of those quotes, for experimenting with psychedelics. Harvard kicked them out for their experimentation with it. And now Harvard's leading the whole, it's come back full circle. UC Berkeley, Nirvana University, which is a Buddhist-oriented university in Boulder, Colorado. I lived there for a little while. And I actually met, when I was in Boulder, I met a guy or a researcher who also leads psychedelic trips for people with PTSD. And that was in Nirvana. And there's even books out now coming on this, called Michael Pollan, who wrote a famous book called The Omnivore's Dilemma. Michael Pollan wrote a book about his experimentation with psychedelics. He's a best-selling author, and how they helped heal a lot of his deep-seated wounds from childhood. Right?
And so I have something else to add.
Yeah,
I thought
please.
you might want to help with this. So a lot of hippies like to go on pilgrimages, and they like to go to other towns where there's a ton of other hippies, like Mount Shasta, Sedona, Arizona, Boulder, Colorado. What names some other ones? And why do they go there? Because they want to hang out with other hippies and practice peace and love and meditation and all these things that bring them so much joy. And then they also feel accepted because they're around people that understand their ways of thinking and feeling and being. What are the other places you can pilgrimage to? What the hippies like to go to all the time?
You can pilgrimage anywhere.
But I mean, there's meeting places, right? It's like Sedona, Mount Shasta. Like there's places that
You and I have probably lived in it. Wow.
There's known places that if you guys ever get like a desire to like go to those places, they exist, and they're a lot of fun to go to.
Yeah.
They're really, really fun.
Yeah, there's some really fantastic
Yeah.
places all throughout. Yeah. You can tell, Angela's had some wild experience. Have you ever had a wild experience? Have you ever had a deeply healing experience with psychedelics yourself? Also referred to as plant medicine, right?
I don't know if they were deeply healing. I would say it was more experiential. But I haven't done it that much, maybe to get to that deep, deep healing place. But I've had deep, deep healing with many things, like in the healing arts, like sound healing. There's so many wonderful things in the healing arts field, that you can play with and practice that bring deep healing.
Awesome. Another sign of this sort of like hippie revival, Margaret, is ecological awareness. Right? People are becoming more aware. It's becoming accepted now, right? To become more ecologically aware about things that are happening regarding the planet. You talked about alternative energy 20 years ago. Most Americans would have been like, give me my oil, baby, give me my coal. I don't care. I don't really care what's happening, right? Just as long as my energy's coming, as long as the lights are on and things are happening, I don't really care where anything's coming from. Well, 75% of Americans now want more solar, 71% want more wind, which is suggesting that more and more Americans are waking up and saying, what? Yeah, do something different. This whole oil thing is not working anymore, right? This is bad. This is inefficient. This is literally killing the earth that sustains us and nourishes us. We got to go a different path, right? So our attitudes, even about how we consume and where our sources of energy from, is it indicative that we're actually starting to care a little bit more about our connection to the earth? Right? That's pretty substantial. More and more Americans are growing, are really enjoying farmers markets. Right? Why are farmers markets really good for the earth? Why are they good for us and the earth? What is about farmers markets that would show an increasing ecological awareness? Yeah.
So you're supporting the local farmers that are actually living in the community that you're a part of.
They're producing food, they're growing foods that are actually what? Healthy and all natural. They're not packed with Monsanto GMOs and all of that, garbage that we're
Not
consuming.
eating bug spray every time you buy it.
Yeah, people are becoming a little bit more aware about wanting to get their food directly from their farmers in their communities that's actually healthy, real food, right? And that actually promotes what? Not this dependence on these giant farms that are causing a lot of environmental degradation, right? Look at the number of farmers, look at that statistic. 94 to 2019, the number of farmers markets nationally rose from around 1,800 to almost 9,000, right, nationally. They're exploding in popularity. How many people have been to a farmers market? Great little version, right? They're fantastic. Angela here she has a giant garden, right? And she's doing the farmers market in Franklin, right? Down 30 minutes from here.
Yeah, I do both. I live off the grid and I do organic gardening.
Yeah.
And I only went to the farmer's market a couple times though. I sold shiitake mushrooms that I was growing.
Yeah.
I did it a couple times.
Yeah, you got enough to do it every week if you wanted to. So she's one of your farmers, right? Growth of back to the land communities, right? So what was a big stereotype of the 60s and 70s? A lot of people moving off to what? Communes, right? Communes, self-sustaining communities. Where what? You grow your own food. Groups of hippies live together. They share in child care with each other. They grow their own food. They create and build their own environmentally sustainable houses. I've stayed on a couple of these communities, quite a few of these communities through the years, and for short periods, right, like in a week or nights here and there. I was actually invited to live on one, and it was kind of strange. Accepted, right? What's interesting is that we're seeing a huge growth in these of people deciding to move essentially off the grid with other groups of hippie-minded folk to kind of get away from the mechanical style of living, right? They provide their own energy. And I'll tell you about a place. There's a place in Tennessee, one of the most fantastic places I've ever stayed at. It's called The Farm, right? One of the most famous hippie communes in America. It was created in 1971. It was a group of hippies from California, and they caravanned on these tie-dye school buses. They drove straight across the country. The cops busted like half of the buses. Half the caravan was busted with, marijuana and other things, but cops really did not like this. But they made it to Tennessee, and they got, first they had like 100 acres, and then it expanded into almost 1,000 acres. And it's a whole village. They have, everything is run by solar power. The whole thing is solar powered. They have, they grow all their own food. They even have their own little school thing. It's like a village school, and the kids all run around with shirts that say, "Think for yourself, question authority." And the kids are allowed to fire their principal if they feel like the principal isn't, up to standards. And it's a wild community. But the most beautiful thing about it, their whole thing is based on service. Right? They're a service-based community. So they have volunteers in their communities that started a private ambulance service in New York City when they found out that ambulances weren't able to keep up with the need of how many people. They were finding that ambulances weren't responding fast enough to the needs of people in poorer neighborhoods. So they started filling that need and sending medics over there. They worked on earthquake relief in Guatemala and sent a bunch of people from the community down to Guatemala to help build houses for indigenous peoples when their houses were destroyed in the earthquake. So they're involved in massive service projects. So they're living what they love. They're totally living what they preach. They don't really live very, they have their houses. They have these little clay structures that they build that almost look like adobe houses. And you can go stay in them, and they have rooftop gardens on these little adobe style clay houses. They look like little almost like alien domes. But they stay naturally cool during summer, and then they keep you warm during winter. And I actually stayed in one of these little adobe clay houses. I have a picture somewhere. It's ridiculous, you know. Looks like a little alien spaceship, and I was living in one of these. It's wild, you know. And,
I didn't think Adobe building a sustainable building did well in wetter
Oh,
climates.
it did fantastic.
Because usually the
It
Adobe's.
wasn't Adobe. It was like some kind of clay structure they used. I don't even really know. But they had these like amazing rooftop gardens on them. The windows were made out of recycled, you know, wine bottles and all
Was
that.
it an Earthship?
It was similar to an Earthship.
Okay.
Just like basically an Earthship. Maybe it wasn't Adobe. It was like some kind of clay.
Because
Yeah.
Earthships are like a certain way of building. You can build a building and it's.
Out of all natural material.
Yeah, it's all natural material.
Yeah, it was wild.
It's in Taos, New Mexico, is where they started it.
Yeah,
Earthships.
it's wild to see that community flourish the way they do. And it'd be a traditional hippie commune. That's how it operated. They get together, you know, a couple times a week for group meditations and talks by other people like we're doing right now. Somebody different will speak every week, and you know, it's really really cool. You know, so a lot of people are deciding to kind of move off from traditional society into these kind of like self-sustaining communities. What would be the draw of that? The draw of moving off into these kind of communities? Yeah.
Just like breaking out from the church that you were talking about earlier, like you don't really, you still have like the government, but you're less attached, less dependent.
You're less dependent. You're living in total connection with what? Earth, nature. Right? It's wild. Right? So a lot of these communities are starting to flourish, re-flourish. Right? We're seeing a lot more people deciding to move off into these kinds of arrangements. Now, people still have their own, there's different styles. Some people have like a dorm style where they all live in like the same house, like different families. Others all maintain their own private residences at the farm. They still have their own private residences. It's almost like a little village. It's just rooted in really strong kind of hippie ethos. Yeah.
It's probably a big benefit to living in those communities is that the people that are there with you actually
They
wouldn't just leave if they didn't like how.
And you're always free to leave too. People leave. Actually, if you're born in those communities at 16, they give you, it's kind of similar to how the Amish do it. At 16, they actually encourage. 16, 17, they encourage people to farm. Children they will give you a little allowance and go off. Go out of the community and go live in the mainstream society and make a choice whether you want to come back or not. Because they want them to see the differences of how they live versus the outside. And you can't understand, right? It's part of that development of wisdom. You can't appreciate how the way you've been living unless you go out into the mainstream. And some people don't come back, right? Some people are like, whoa, I really like all of the things of the world, and I want to go live in the city, you know, and all that. Yeah.
Is it, like I'm from an area where there's a lot of Amish people, and like, so Rumspringer, when they get to go out,
Very similar.
it's brutal though. Like if you choose to not come back, you're never allowed to contact your family. Like,
It's not like that at all.
okay.
No, it's like the Amish, but without the strict, you know, all of that, right? They're hippie communities, right? You know, we'll love you if you come back. We'll love you if you don't. You know, it's all love, right? The whole thing, right? Okay. Anti-establishment beliefs, right? Got a couple of things here, right? We're seeing a big thing that happened in the 60s and 70s was what? People were really questioning what? Everything. Government, corporations, media, all of that. Okay, I have a quick question here. All right, how many people have a great deal of trust or confidence in the mainstream media? Show of hands. No one. Oh, we have one person.
Going like this.
A great deal of trust.
Oh.
I think the term was, when we were sure got the correct term, a great deal of trust. A great deal of trust. Sort of more iffy. Okay.
I trust mainstream media more when I look for the same topic from a variety of outlets, not fringe ones like Fox Fox News or ones with really ugly looking websites. But I don't just go to like CNN or MSNBC and just take that as,
Okay.
you know, the truth. I look for a
Underwood.
variety of ones to be like, is there multiple people saying this?
Okay, sure.
And also, are they all from the same source? Because if all from the same source, like in AP, just regurgitating what AP says, it's not really them doing reporting on different people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Morgan on that, especially as a poli-sci major. You know, I look at different opinions. So I'll read some of the more conservative viewpoints from Fox or Newsmax, but I'll also dig into, you know, more liberal opinions from CNN. But I'll look for that middle ground, The Hill, AP News, you know, independent journalists that I can find. You know, see what all three. Yeah, and then based on that, I'll make my opinion on the subject.
That makes perfect sense. Y'all have media literacy. That's actually, I mean, a lot of Americans don't have, right? Sadly, right? How many people, just curiosity, so according to a poll from Gallup, just 7% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in the mainstream media. All right, how many people, by the way, what I'm trying to get at is a lot of in the 60s and 70s during the hippie movement, there was a great distrust of establishment institutions, right? Great distrust. How about government? What percentage of you trust the federal government to do the right thing? Quote. Wow. All right. So only 20% of Americans in that poll. Just 6% say the government is careful with taxpayer money. Just 8% of Americans describe the federal government as responsive to the needs of ordinary Americans. That one blew me away. I was like, wow, that's less than 1 in 10, right? What does that say, right? Like, okay, so 2022, 70% of Americans distrust corporate America, right? In that recent poll. So what I'm really trying to get at is what? That we're seeing a level of distrust of establishment institutions. In other words, those that are conditioning us into that what kind of way of living? Mechanical way of living that turns us away from our authentic self. We're starting to see through that, right? More of us are seeing through that veil that our sort of institutions are attempting to program us into, right? Programming, I think, is a good word. Stephen Marley, who was the son of the reggae legend Marley, right? You've heard of Stephen Marley, right? Stephen Marley used the term mind control, right? It's a good way to describe what we're all kind of subjected to, right? What would be a talk on the hippie revival without talking about cannabis, right? Now, cannabis served as a huge part. Again, it can be abused. Any of these substances can be abused, right? Anything can be abused. Caffeine, sugar, alcohol, psychedelics, marijuana, anything can be terribly abused. If you're using to escape from anything, or you form an addiction, it's abuse. Is that fair to say? That's pretty fair to say, right? Oh yeah, important.
Well, under that definition you just gave, I think there's some people with a money addiction.
I think, Morgan, that's a brilliant comment. I think many of us have a money addiction is one of maybe the worst addictions we have in this country. I think it consumes us, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a brilliant comment. You know, so why did the hippies like cannabis? What was it about cannabis? Again, it was the same thing as kind of psychedelics. It's a light, mild psychedelic that kind of, if done with intention, you're going to hear me say that a lot, right? If done with intention. If done with intention, not just recreation, right? It ties you, it has the ability to turn you within yourself. By the way, I should point this out. There are many religions who have used marijuana for spiritual insight. The Shivites within Hinduism, the Rastas within Jamaica. There are several tribes within East Africa that use it as a form of spiritual tuning yourself within yourself. it's for the higher spiritual purposes, right? It's interesting, when the farm, that commune I told you about, when they formed, they banned every single solitary drug in their community. Alcohol, even psychedelics, because they thought people were kind of abusing the psychedelics. So they were like, we're not going to use psychedelics. Other hard drugs, tobacco, because of the nicotine, all of that. So the only thing they kept legal on their community was marijuana. Right? Everything else was essentially done away with on that community. Kind of interesting, right? So we're seeing liberalization of cannabis laws. I mean, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd see this day, right? 23 states have legalized recreational marijuana. 23 states. By the way, this is wild. It's not the state governments that are doing it for the most part. You have. Who's doing this? Who's legalizing it? The people. Through direct ballot initiatives. In other words, direct democracy. And in many cases, the citizens are voting for marijuana legalization against their state government's discretion. I think is wonderful. Anytime the people stand up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so to own ballot initiatives, I'm helping with the ballot initiative in Ohio right now to help legalize recreational marijuana. I've been calling people in Ohio for these past 2 to 3 months now, and hearing personal stories of how this will help them. Then I've also had those few people where I've gotten called every name in the book for supporting this. So both sides make great arguments for why or why not it should be legalized. But at the end of the day, if the pros are going to outweigh the cons, then it's a simple vote yes on legalizing recreational marijuana.
The biggest pros is the medical argument. Helping people, it's been proven scientifically, not even opinion-based anymore. Science has proven it helps with a whole element of medical problems. Glaucoma, anxiety. It's helping people with pain relief. There's even been studies that have been incredibly proven. I have one here citing case reports in oncology, a major medical journal. I had to call my sister to make sure it was legit. She's a medical doctor. And they actually quote from this. Rick Simpson, who was Rick Simpson's a famous, he's experimented with marijuana for a very long time. He used it he had skin cancer lesions all in his arms. Doctor said, this is out of control, it's going to kill you. And he put a high dose of essentially tinctures of cannabis oil on the cancer, cured, 100% cured. And of course, the Canadian government has tried to ruin this man's life because he's been helping other people cure cancers. He doesn't claim to be a cure-all. Certain kinds of cancers show to be effective on some and not on others. But nonetheless, really wild. So 38 states have legalized medical cannabis, which is pretty wild. Of course, who's falling way behind in all this? What part of the country? The South. Right? The South is way behind on this, way behind on this movement. But I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that there's strong medical reasons to do this, right? Medicinal reasons.
And then there's veterans that cannot get any relief at all with their PTSD, and the only relief they can ever find is through the using of the cannabis.
They're using the cannabis.
I've talked to many people and heard many stories about that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
And then young kids that have there's this type of epilepsy, seizure disorder that young little kids are having. And these babies are having seizures, these little 3-year-olds are having seizures every 5 minutes. And they're bedridden and they cannot get out of bed. And they had to seek out a special strand of the plant just to help their babies and their children with this seizure disorder. And they found one. They found 2 brothers that were growing in Colorado that had this very specific strand. And it helped many, many children.
It helped a lot of children. Actually, I knew somebody who were suffering from seizures where the cannabis really helped.
My uncle, before he passed away at the beginning of this year, he was diagnosed with brain cancer. He had a really big tumor on the side of his head, and not even like, he would smoke just a little bit and have so much pain. And it's really like, I was really happy to see him. Like, it was so small, and it kind of sucked that we did have to get it for him illegally, but it was just something that like changed his life at the very end, and it was like very powerful, like being able to interact with him in that different way because of it. He was able to get some sort of relief.
Have some quality of life while he's going to his name, yeah.
I had forgotten what it was called. I was just looking it up, but I had seen a video of a dude that had Parkinson's, and he was unbelievably shaky, and like he couldn't even sit still. Constant muscle spasms over his entire body, and I think he tried like an edible, and then like 40 minutes later, he was just completely
Wow.
It's really wild to me.
For sure. Yeah. So, growing popularity of, I don't want to speak to this one. I don't have any, this is the only one I don't have any statistics for. Can't really prove this sixth one, right? But I'll share some anecdotal experience. This is a hard one to measure. There's really no statistics on this one, right? But one of the things that defined, I always thought that if you want to know if we're entering a period of higher consciousness or expanded awareness of our inner selves, one of the great measures of that is the quality of the music, right? What is the music communicating, right? I've always thought that, right? That if you want to find out about how conscious a community you're walking into is, check out the music, right? And obviously, was the 60s and 70s defined by a lot of that music? Yeah, you think like Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, right? You think of Janis Joplin, right? You think of Jefferson Airplane, right? You think of all these wonderful bands, Bob Marley, right? All these incredibly bands were communicating that same message we've been talking about today, right? Like inner seeking, get out of the mechanical way of living, turn to your inner self, find inner peace, spread that peace with others, right? That was the whole entire message, right? Question things. Don't just accept everything you heard by your institutional authority figures, right?
And love your brothers and sisters.
And love your brothers and sisters, right? That was the message, right? And I can feel, again, I can't prove statistically, this is happening right now. We're seeing more of that, right? This summer I had the opportunity with Angela to go check out a lot of these little conscious little music festivals, healing arts and music festivals that seem to me to be popping up more and more and more. I mean, they're smaller festivals, 100, 500 to 1,000 people showing up. And some of those musicians, we constantly ran into musicians who were, unbelievable.
Oh, it was incredible.
Unbelievable. It was
Some of the most amazing musicians. Spreading conscious, loving, caring language through their music.
Yeah, and
To uplift people and help people.
yeah, it was unbelievable. Everything from devotional music to reggae music to conscious rock music. We heard, a couple of weeks ago. So I suspect that that's happening right now. That we're really seeing that.